We are awaiting the North Korean foreign minister to take the podium at the United Nations in New York, as of course the world listened to President Trump at that same podium just days ago. For more insight on the relations between the United States and North Korea, let's bring in Fox News military analyst General Jack Keane. General, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your insight as always.
Good to be here, Elizabeth.
There was so much fallout after the president took the podium and people were analyzing his speech, and of course we're probably going to do the same today. But I'm curious as to what your takeaway is this week, and especially when it comes to the pressure that we're now putting on North Korea that we hadn't been putting on North Korea before, and the potential impact on those pressures, those sanctions.
Well, I thought, generally speaking, it was a very accomplished speech. He focused on reform in the UN. 130 nations showed up Monday of that week to listen to him talk about specifically reform. That is actually staggering in itself. He identified the major threats that we're facing in the near term. And then he concluded by calling on 193 leaders and members of the UN, let's deal with these threats collectively together. Some of that was lost on his critics. But specifically on North Korea, I think this week may be a very pivotal week, because here's what's happened. The United States has issued an executive order saying anybody that trades with North Korea has got to cut the trade off or we'll stop trade with you. He gave President Xi a heads up to that fact. Does that mean that the United States would actually shut off trade with China? That would be a global earthquake in terms of the world economy. What did President Xi do? He complied. So he is cutting off his banks from trading, and they trade in U.S. currency, by the way. Right. He's cutting off his banks from trading with North Korea, just as we expect all the other nations to do who trade with us. That is a stunning achievement. That separates President Trump from all of his predecessors in being able to exercise, one, leverage on China, and two, really squeeze North Korea.
Why now? Why did China comply now? Does it behoove them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. It's a great question, Elizabeth. Number one, I think North Korea has become a global pariah. Yeah. The whole world is looking at them, and everybody in the world knows that while their strategy may be rational, to hold the United States at bay with nuclear ICBMs, they're belligerent and they're reckless. Kim Jong-un is a reckless person personally. So they all see that, and that's getting embarrassing for China, because everybody knows that North Korea never would be where they are without China's help. Right. We all get that. Right. Number two, and maybe more specific to President Xi, the Communist Congress in China is meeting. And President Xi is the most ambitious Chinese leader we've had in a generation. He clearly wants to replace the United States as a preeminent global leader in the world. That is where he is heading. And he needs to consolidate his political base at this party Congress. He does not want this huge distraction of North Korea taking place, and also being in a dialogue with President Trump, who's going to cut off aid with China, right, and then have a discussion at the Communist Party Congress. So I think geopolitically and his political issues for himself are factors. All that said, if Xi does what he said he's going to do, this could indeed, and I'm thinking optimistically now, be the end of the Kim dynasty, because if that country gets squeezed economically, the leaders around Kim Jong-un know that he brought this on ourselves. This has never happened before. And if that truly begins to happen, it's not so much the people will take over the government. The government's got too many guns for that. But the leaders around him, I doubt if they would put up with a total economic collapse in this country.
Well, that's sort of my next question, because if it does happen, if China does follow through with your optimistic vision, what's next then? I mean, do we go back to the fact that I think months ago, I had a conversation where it was maybe even a decade ago, there was a conversation between 6 nations that took place. Eventually it fell through, but the United States and North Korea were included in that. Is that something that could happen next, or is that completely, what's the next step?
Well, pessimistically, let me just say this and I'll answer your question. I'm not sure China will totally come through, right, because in the past they've always hedged. Now they're committing to come through, but there are plenty of ways to get money to Korea, North Korea. Okay, so we have to keep a skeptical eye on the Chinese in terms of what are they really doing. Now we can track these transactions because electronically it's easy to do, but I think it would be the State Department has said right from the beginning, we're willing to negotiate. Remember what every time the North Koreans have negotiated, grandfather, Kim Jong-un's father, what they've used negotiations for, Elizabeth, is to buy time. Right. And I think if we're going to negotiate with them, we've got to recognize that's the only reason they're doing that. We have to be wary of it.
All right, General Jack Keane, thank you so much. A lot of different options, so I'm certainly we're going to have you back to see how it all unfolds. Thank you so much.